Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of PeaceLines, the podcast from London Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. You can find this episode on Spotify and YouTube. We also have a presence on Instagram, Blue Sky, and of course, our website. At CND, we say no to nuclear weapons, no to war, and yes to a peaceful, secure, and nuclear weapons-free future. Each episode, we break down nuclear developments both in the UK and abroad with researchers, campaigners, and the occasional politician. No jargon, just clear explanations. I'm Jessica Freeman, your host for this episode. I'm a committee member at London CND and also the editor of our newsletter, which you can sign up for via our website. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Sophie Bolt, CND's Secretary General and a lifelong time peace campaigner. Hi, Sophie, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Hi, it's great to be here and really lovely to meet you.
Likewise, it's an absolute pleasure. So I'd like to start right at the beginning and ask you what it was that first drew you to campaigning and demanding a nuclear-free future.
Well, in terms of campaigning, what actually got me involved in campaigning was I went to university and it was a really big deal for me to go. I was a mature student. I was like, oh, and I remember sort of like really struggling with I was going to be getting into £5,000 worth of debt. And I was like, oh, can I do this? And, or am am I worth £5,000 to have like my degree? So it was a big deal. And I went and it was a really transformative experience for me. And very quickly, it became clear that I was actually going to be the last year where you got a maintenance grant and you weren't having to pay tuition fees. So very quickly it became clear that there was a huge attack on students, making them pay thousands of pounds worth of, tuition fees, not getting a grant anymore. And so I was like, oh my goodness, there are going to be like, tens of thousands of people who are not going to be able to go into higher education and have the experience that I'm having. This is really, terrible. So I was like, I've got to get involved in the campaign to try and, stop this from happening. So that's kind of how I got involved in campaigning, really, from a personal point of view, but seeing the impact that was going to be having on a whole sort of generation of students. And look at the situation now. I mean, it's absolutely horrific. I mean, I don't know how much debt you've come out with, but it's like £50,000 or something. It's really, really, really horrific and has obviously a massive impact on people's life choices and all of that. Anyway, so but from that, I kind of met like really amazing people, who were involved in a whole number of like different areas of campaigning and got involved in the campaigning against the war in Iraq. And obviously, CND was campaigning really strongly against that and making all the connections around the fact that the nuclear hypocrisy of the British government, that was saying we've got to bomb Iraq because, it could have weapons of mass destruction, when of course we knew they weren't there. And yet here was, our country with, lots of nuclear weapons and was replacing its own nuclear weapons, not meeting its nuclear non-proliferation treaty obligations, all of that. So, it was very formative time for me. And that was kind of, I suppose, my very early days with sort of CND and getting involved in sort of student CND. So, yeah, and here we are. Yeah. So that was kind of the beginning of it, really. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just about to say, so becoming from being a student member of CND, you've now become the Secretary General, and that happened in November 2024, if I'm
Mhm.
correct.
Yeah,
And I think so much has happened since you've become the Secretary General, right?
I know.
The UK has increased its defence spending to 2.5% of GDP. We've had nuclear tensions between India and Pakistan, US nukes at Lakenheath, nuclear expansion at Marham. Top of that, you were arrested at a national Palestine demonstration. I mean, that's quite a lot to happen in a relatively short amount of time. So it's been a bit of a whirlwind. So how would you say that all these events have shaped your priorities coming in as Secretary General? And what would you say this kind of says for the peace movement to come?
Yeah, I mean, yes, it has just, I mean, it was starting to accelerate in terms of sort of the worsening of the international situation, sort of the threat of nuclear weapons being used, before I kind of came in. So it wasn't like I sort of came in, and all of a sudden, these sort of things happened. I mean, and also I've sort of obviously I've been involved in CND for a long time, been part of the leadership of CND. So we've sort of been discussing these kind of international, kind of global dynamics, obviously for a long time. But certainly, in terms of like how you set your priorities. I mean, I suppose it's always important for people to understand that, like, first and foremost, like CND is like a democratic membership led organization. So it's not like I just go, yeah, hey, we're going to do this. You know what I mean? We have like a very kind of clear like campaigning framework, and that's sort of decided upon every year at our national conference. Like, so any member can come along, put a motion in, sort of saying we need to kind of work on this, and the membership will discuss that. So it's our kind of campaign priorities are very much kind of shaped and led by our kind of grassroots membership base really. But then within that we have a council, which is again another kind of elected layer. So, and that meets kind of quarterly. So we would then like discuss, how those political developments are changing, how we're responding to things, talking about kind of what's kind of happening at the moment. And then of course, there's a team of officers, and we meet every week, so we're talking about like the tactics around things, and a lot more kind of detail about what's going on and how we're responding to it. So, it's not kind of just me like deciding this. And I am incredibly lucky in that I have like an amazing team, an incredible sort of staff team, but also the officers are really, really, very experienced and really great. And also there's a wider layer there of like vice presidents, so the former General Secretary, Kate Hudson, she's the vice president, so I'm, really lucky. There are lots of people that I can kind of like call on when I'm like, I need some advice on this. So yeah. So yes, but ultimately it's massively escalated in terms of, the sort of the threats that we're facing kind of internationally on kind of every level really. And certainly from the point of view of sort of the nuclear weapons situation. I mean, it's just really, really accelerated with, of course, since 2022, we had news. And this was sort of detective work by activists in the US who were able to kind of find out that it looked like the US was planning to station nuclear weapons at RAF Lakenheath again. Like no announcement, no debate, no discussion in Parliament at all. This is totally sort of secretive. And even now that we know that there's overwhelming evidence, there's sort of planes that are especially sort of sanctioned really to deliver nuclear material, sort of nuclear bombs. Overwhelming evidence of those being tracked, coming from the States to RAF Lakenheath. Like no comment, no mention from the British government, from the Defence Secretary or anything about this. They just their position is we can neither confirm nor deny. Instead, what they're doing, what we're seeing is that they will leak something to, one of their friendly journalists, you know what I mean? So this kind of came out in the Times. But, we totally know that they are there now. And, why is it so serious? Well, these particular bombs that have been developed by the US, they have been designed specially to be used on the battlefield. They're presented as, they're kind of promoted as what they call is tactical nuclear weapons, and how this is kind of talked about in the sort of defense sector and within sort of the military kind of news is, oh, these are very precise nuclear bombs, and they are very targeted, and they're called tactical nuclear bombs, and they're small, and they will only make a small, they really won't do any kind of harm at all, which of course is really like pretty horrific actually, because when you look at the destructive power of these nuclear bombs, they have like what's called a kind of we kind of call it a dialer yield, yeah. So they can set these nuclear bombs to different yields. So some of them can be smaller than the bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Some of them can be way, way larger. So, the sort of the smallest of these yields could kill about 4,000 people, just one bomb. The largest of these sort of yields could kill 600,000 people. So that's really the sort of the scale of the devastation. And of course, all nuclear weapons are radioactive. So, there will be sort of nuclear fallout as a result of these nuclear bombs. So, they are very, very dangerous because the rhetoric around them all and the sort of the technical developments around them is that they have been designed to be used on the battlefield alongside conventional weapons. So, this is really kind of pushing, we feel this is really about trying to sort of like increase the risk of nuclear weapons being used. And as I say, the US has designed them specifically for that. So they're there. And we're in a situation where we have very serious sort of nuclear flashpoints, particularly around Ukraine. I'm sure people listening were really terrified, like last November, where there was this sort of huge kind of escalation and very, very rapid escalation when the sort of Trump administration won. Should I say, Donald Trump kind of won the election, and there was this big sort of scramble by the Biden administration, I think really to try and increase the territorial gain of Ukraine, and the British government totally supported and lobbied, in fact, Biden to allow Ukraine to be able to use these long range missiles. So the Storm Shadow missile from Britain and the ATACMS from the US. And this was in a situation where Russia had already basically sort of threatened to use its nuclear weapons against non-nuclear weapon state that was, threatening to use these type of nuclear weapons that would, these sort of long-range weapons that could, attack deep into Russian territory. And they went ahead and did this anyway. And there was I think we were all really pretty terrified that we were sort of facing a sort of a nuclear confrontation. And so that situation, unfortunately, we don't have guarantees, do we, that situation isn't going to happen again? Because when you see what's happening across Europe with this huge war drive, as you referred to, the government's increased military spending to 2.5% of GDP. It's going to increase it, further, and this is happening across Europe. Hundreds of billions of pounds and euros are now being poured into building new lethal weaponry. And all the rhetoric that has been surrounding this to justify these huge, increases in military spending is massively destabilizing the situation in Ukraine. We're not seeing, unfortunately, from this government, we're not seeing, real sort of serious moves to try and secure a ceasefire, or any kind of settlement, or looking at sort of common security issues like how can we really properly de-escalate this situation. We're seeing the opposite. We're seeing this sort of big escalation, and so that's the context in which we need to look at like what's going on at Lakenheath. These bombs are being designed to be used on the battlefield. So, that's why it's a really, really important, very, very sort of serious situation. So we've got sort of a demonstration taking place at RAF Lakenheath on the Saturday, the 20th of September. It's just as Donald Trump is going to be visiting Britain. So he's going to be in Windsor and on this like terrible kind of state, this sort of state visit, rolling out the red carpet for this really, desperately sort of dangerous, reckless leader. And so we're sort of saying, Donald Trump's he's not welcome, and nor is nuclear weapons. So take them back to the US with you. We don't want them here. So that's, a big sort of priority for us. And we're part of what's called the Lakenheath Alliance for Peace, which is lots of organisations that are part of that. And have been really great initiatives there already. There was a peace camp in the summer. There was a big blockade that was kind of the culmination of that peace camp. Um, that was all about sort of like bringing the base, to a halt, and shining a really sort of strong spotlight on that base to say, we are not going to sort of sit back and just let this happen. We're going to kind of protest, and we've got kind of form because there have been US nuclear weapons at Lakenheath before, and it was, because of like a concerted, really, really determined protest movement around that base, that resulted in the US, withdrawing those nuclear weapons in 2008. So, we're going to keep on campaigning. We're going to make sure that we get rid of those nuclear weapons because they don't make us safe. They don't make us safe at all. The opposite. They put a target on our backs. With the sort of US playing the role it is in the world, we're only going to be encountering more and more, people that are going to be involved, and countries that are going to be involved in sort of confrontations with the US. And so that will put like Britain on the nuclear front line. So that's, a big priority for us. And also the other thing, which is, Britain's sort of nuclear expansion, which, these two developments have happened within, the space of a few weeks, with the government like making this really, really serious announcement. Again, not in Parliament, no parliamentary debate. This was made at a NATO summit that Britain's going to be buying, nuclear capable jets from Trump. So yes, there is a lot going on. They're just two of the main kind of priorities for us, but yeah, a lot.
Definitely. And I think you've spoken a lot here to all these escalations that we're seeing. We're seeing the whole of Europe hiking up their military spending, etc. And you also spoke to how there is a sentiment that people are afraid. We talk about Ukraine, for example, where we were concerned about what was going to happen. So we're hearing quite a lot more of the voices in favor of stronger military responses to these threats. And I was wondering how you respond to these individuals, both on a personal level and in your role as a Secretary General as well.
Well, I suppose, I mean, it's there are serious, issues. There are like serious crises going on in the world, aren't there? In terms of climate change, in terms of sort of the financial crisis, in terms of global poverty, and people are and domestically, in terms of like levels of poverty and deprivation. We've got the rise of the far right. Like there's very sort of serious crises that we are all facing. And so it's understandable that people are frightened, things like people not being able to pay their rent, the fear that you're going to be made homeless, like that's a very, very serious threat, isn't it, to your sort of security? People who are getting their homes flooded regularly because of, extreme weather conditions, that's totally sort of devastating for people. So, the military kind of coming along and saying, "Oh, we can solve all these problems. We can make you safe. We can provide you with a kind of a prosperous and secure future." I mean, it's just palpably false, isn't it? Actually spending hundreds of billions of pounds on nuclear weapons isn't going to solve the climate crisis. It's only going to accelerate it. It isn't going to solve poverty. It's only going to worsen it. You know what I mean? And actually, what we're seeing is this, as I say, this really very kind of reckless rhetoric around the threat from Russia, all of this sort of stuff is to justify these huge increases in military spending is as well as I think the economic situation is just strengthening the far right. And so on all levels, what's being advocated is just going to make the situation far, far worse. So for us, it's like, yeah, let's have the debate, So and let's outline like how are these things actually going to like keep us safe, and they're not at all. And I think that it's really important that we are having that debate, and we're very happy to have that debate. And I think things are slightly shifting in that, CND's finding that we are getting a few more invites to go on sort of mainstream, TV and radio and that kind of thing. We need to kind of get our voices out there, because the moment people hear what we're saying, they're like, yeah, I totally agree with you. Because when people have the choice, and polling has shown this, like, for years and years and years, it's the same. When people have the choice between increasing military spending at the detriment of health, for instance, of the NHS, they do not support the increase in military spending. And I think you can see how unpopular this government is. And that I think that reflects the fact that people can see that, like, this really, really kind of dangerous and kind of desperate like war drive, this whole talk about we've got to be war ready and all that sort of stuff. It's very alarming, and people don't want it. They want to have like affordable housing. They want to know that their children are going to be able to, get a proper education. You know what I mean? And have a future to actually kind of look forward to. So, I think that's what we have to do. We have to outline like what the real threats that we face, and what we need to do about those.
Absolutely. And you've spoken a lot about this kind of dangerous rhetoric that we're seeing at the moment. And you're really pushing to be seen more in the mainstream media, getting interview invites, etc. And I was just wondering how you deal with that on a personal level, because sometimes the debate can get quite nasty, it can get quite personal, in fact. And I was wondering, how do you manage having a thick skin in the face of that?
I think it's practice, really. And I think it's like having the confidence of your arguments. And when, you do get kind of personalized stuff or like swipes at CND, I just sort of let them go, because they're sort of very weak arguments. I mean, I'm learning as I'm going along, but like this whole thing about pivoting, you know what I mean? You get sort of something that's just totally going off on the wrong track. You did pivot, you just talk about what you want to talk about. That's really because like you've got the opportunity, haven't you, to be able to sort of like talk to, a very large section of the population that you wouldn't normally. So, do that. So I don't, yeah, it doesn't sort of get to me really. I think it's more learning like how to kind of manage those sort of situations. So you're not feeling like you come away going being kicked around the kicked around the park or something. Yeah.
I think that's definitely a great lesson within there for sure. And I was also wondering for our listeners, talking about getting the CND word out there, how can we help amplify that word together? What collective action can we do? And can you speak to grassroots activism and its power and its impact that it can have?
Yeah. Well, I think there are on so many levels you can amplify, what CND is doing. I mean, on the first level, I think it's really like social media is so important. And we're working really hard to try and make our social media as engaging as possible. And so sharing, you know what I mean? Sharing our content on social media is like the number one thing. So, if you can do that, that would be really, really great. I mean, there are people who are like, I don't want to go anywhere near social media. I don't really, so that's totally fine too. I think, it's sort of being prepared to have those conversations with, people that you work with, people, your family members, your friends, having those conversations. I think that's kind of really important, and feeling that it's okay to sort of challenge what we're seeing in the kind of the mainstream media. I think also, you know, I feel like coming on the demonstrations, especially, demonstrations for Palestine, against the genocide. I think coming on the demonstration, against the Trump state visit, on the 17th. These are really important because it's about showing, the huge opposition that there is to, what either what our government's doing or its kind of values, it's kind of wrong values. But also it's incredibly empowering. You see yourself, as part of this movement. You can visually sort of see it. So I think that's really good, and kind of, we're always there with our sort of our banners, and our placards, and leafleting with our stalls. You know what I mean? So helping with that, that's just really totally brilliant. If you want to kind of help amplify CND's kind of message and messaging on demonstrations, and do help with that, that's really, really good. And then I think, there are what other ways we have people who are really excellent at like writing letters to the press, and they do get them published. The Guardian and local press. I mean, that's something else that's really good. Is like you can really kind of challenge this pro-war drive and rhetoric that way, and it does get read. It's really, really important. So, and then I think like there are lots of like really creative people out there who are doing art, music, lots of kind of cultural stuff. And I suppose we would say, like, keep on doing what you're doing, and see how you can kind of integrate, some kind of, element of like of our kind of peace, and another world is possible kind of messaging into your work. That would be really good, and sort of again kind of sharing our sort of message of peace and a nuclear free world. And get in touch. We that's another way that's really, really amazing, in terms of like when we have people like Jeremy Corbyn is will and always be a celebrity. He's also a vice president of CND. Having Jeremy, wearing our No More Hiroshimas t-shirt on social media, kind of when, we got lots and lots and lots of support for that. But equally, people like Maxine Peake, the wonderful actor, Maxine Peake, again. So yes, that's something that really can help amplify, but not just really famous, really famous people. We've had people who've contacted us to say, I bought your t-shirt. I was like at, the Pride event in Brighton, and I'm sharing it on social media. That's just totally lovely for us. You know what I mean? It's like showing how grassroots, and what sort of a broad sort of support we have. So, all of those kind of things, and many more.
Thank you. Those are some really great suggestions. And I think you're really speaking to the fact that CND creates a community around their activism, and you feel really part of something big. And that comes really strongly through what you've been saying. And I especially like the writing to local newspapers. I think that's a great one.
Cool.
So thank you so much for your time. And thank you so much for letting me pick your brain about all things nuclear disarmament. And I'm sure we can keep this conversation going on for hours. It's been super interesting. So thank you so much. And thank you so much to those who are listening. I've been Jessica Freeman. Goodbye.